in the world of trauma and trauma-informed practices, there is a concept of big T and little t, meaning big traumas and little traumas. And I think when this first came out, it was actually kind of progressive because I am sure, and this is all just my opinion, this whole podcast episode is going to be my opinion, okay? But I'm pretty sure that it was like, hey, we need to just acknowledge some of these smaller traumas that can be very impactful on somebody's, not only their human development in cases of children, but in people's lives, right? So there was a desire to separate out, hey, it's not just big traumas like physical abuse and neglect and, somebody being physically harmed or rape or a house fire, something like that. They're like, there's a lot of little traumas that can happen to people that can be significant as well, and we need to acknowledge them. So I think that it was progressive and probably helpful at some point to break out big T's and little t's. But what has happened is I'm seeing a lot of commentary that it's like, should we be breaking them down as big T's and little t's? And as things always do, the pendulum kind of swings. And I believe that by calling things little t's, we diminish their value. And so sometimes little t's, by calling them little, we minimize them, and little t's can be really just as harmful, if not more harmful than big T's. So today what I want to do is break down big T's and little t's, and I also want to tell you my experience with big T's and little t's. I'm going to get a little bit vulnerable, and I'm going to self-disclose some of my own traumas and how big T's and little t's affected me, in the hopes that it helps you kind of understand the difference in how impactful and devastating both can be. All right, I'm going to roll that intro and then we'll dive in. I'm Rebecca Britt, and this is the Stable Moments Podcast. I started this podcast to understand from all perspectives how we can help end the foster care crisis. The overwhelming response was we need to support our local communities. Unwanted, abandoned, orphaned children are the community's responsibility. We must support, guide, love, invest, raise up generations that will nurture, love, and support their own children to end this crisis. So, the purpose of this podcast is to build an army of people that are interested and willing to take responsibility of our foster youth and who are supportive of foster and adoptive families. This is the on-ramp for people who want to get involved but might not know where to start. I want this to be a place where community members feel like they can make a difference, where they feel good enough to make that difference, and believe that they can be a big deal in the life of a child. Thanks for being part of our community, and make sure to join the conversation in the Stable Moments Podcast Facebook group. Together, we can end the foster care crisis. All right. So as humans, with typical human psychology, it is easy for us to sympathize and empathize with people who have had what we would call big T's, which are obvious traumas. They are traumas that if somebody told you them, you would say, that is a trauma for sure. Okay, so this is like, you got beat up, you were in an act of violence, you went to war, and you dealt with bombs or combat, physical abuse, sexual abuse, rape, a house fire, a carjacking. Like, these are things that are like, oh wow, that's a big T. That is like, I can't imagine that happening to me, and that must have been traumatic. Okay, so big T's are just, to me, they're obvious T's, and this again is all just my opinion of like what this is. I haven't read up on like big T's and little t's. I've done a lot of reading on trauma and how it impacts the brain. But as far as like differentiating different traumas, I believe that big T's and little t's were created to make us all feel better about including things that aren't so obvious. Now, humans love to wrap things up into little bows, right? We want to say like, okay, this was a trauma. We want to believe that that wouldn't happen to us. And big T's are very obvious, and we can sympathize and empathize with those. Social workers and people in the social work world or the clinical world list off big T's to justify kids' behaviors. So we might see kids and They might be having behaviors and we say like they have experienced all this stuff, and it's really a way in which we advocate for the kid and we try to prove that their behavior can be justified because they have dealt with some big T's, right? Some big traumas that we can all agree, gosh, if we had gone through that, we would probably have some behaviors too, okay? So then, little T's emerge. And they emerge to say, hey, there's some smaller things that should be accounted for too, and they can have just as big as an impact. This is like what you might call as like micro traumas, like your mom calling you fat as when you grew up. Maybe she called you fat all the time. Well, that's not like a big obvious trauma, but it's traumatic. I mean, I think that we can agree that if you had a mom that always said something like that to you, that would be traumatic. Little T's can be how people respond to you, somebody calling you names. It can be your dad always being, grumpy or pissed off or annoyed, and you always feeling that. It's like, okay, that could be have a huge impact on how you show up and how you experience paternal figures or how you experience men. But if you're sitting there saying, well, he had a dad that was kind of annoyed with him, people might go like, okay, that's not that big of a trauma, right? So I want to tell you a little bit about my story, because I think that in the way that I experience big T's and little T's, I'll be able to make my point that big T's are painful, but little T's can be just as painful, if not more painful. So I was born a very bright light. I mean, I came into this world like, I'm here, and I was so excited to experience life. But I had a big personality, and I was what adults might call annoying. I was the kid that always had her hand up in class, just wanted to make a big splash. I wanted to be in front of the camera. It's like that kid that you're like, chill out. And, I have a kid now that's very much like that. And I get it when you're like, dude, you need to sit down. And I get the desire for the rest of the world to want to dim that child's light, because it's a lot to deal with. But I do feel like from a very, very, very young age, maybe 3 years old, 4, 5, 6, what I got from my world was, you need to dim your light. You need to chill out. You need to sit down. You need to be quiet. You're inappropriate. We don't dance. We sit. We don't yell. We whisper. It was just very, how you present, you being you is wrong. Okay? So for me, of course, that's like a little T. Okay? How people experienced me and how I felt experienced in my world was a little T, right? But I learned, it made me learn, how do I fit in? And how I fit in was to dim my light, to learn what they wanted and to show up as they wanted me to, which really, made me kind of want to die inside. So I realized I didn't belong. And of course, this isn't cognizant. I'm not making conscious thoughts of I guess I don't belong and I'm going to dim my light and all of that. But that's just how that happens. So that was my little T's from the beginning. Now, I had a nurturing home. I had parents that loved me. I had food security. I had home security. So I wouldn't say I had developmental trauma. My brain was able to develop. I didn't miss crucial milestones, and my brain was able to develop in a way that is neurotypical. And I had, I think I had secure attachment there. But these little T's, just how the world experienced me, started me off on, I don't really belong, and being me is not okay. Okay? So then as I grew up, I did have some big T's happen. I had sexual assault. I had a sexual assault from a teacher. So the whole school knew, the whole town knew, right? And I will tell you 100% that the actual sexual assault was not as traumatic as how people responded to the event and to me. So I had to go through court in like a 3-year court trial, and I had to go through depositions, and the town was like, well, I think, I was 13 and he was 43. So there's absolutely no justification for this. But even adults would say like, well, what did you do to turn him on? Or I think she liked it. Or some people weren't allowed to hang out with me anymore. Like I was deemed like a slut or somebody that you didn't want to hang out with because she's over there seducing teachers. It was just really crazy that almost the whole town responded in some way that was to protect them from me, rather than, oh my gosh, this should never happen, we're going to protect you. I just never got validated. So in that, and there's a million people with sexual assault stories where they never got validated, and that they actually got shamed, and that they actually felt it was their fault. And it was another reason for people to not like you. Like now I've just been a burden for everybody, right? I was a burden when I was 6 and a bright light and in the classroom wanting to be loud, and I was being told, be quiet, sit down, shut up. And then when this happens, it's like, oh my gosh, of course you had this. It's like you're the burden. Like if you didn't exist, life for everybody else would be easier, right? So to me, these are the traumas that people don't think of. So everybody would come at, anybody would come at my story and say, I'm so sorry that that teacher did that. I'm so sorry that you were violated when you were 13 and that you had to spend your whole teenage years going to court depositions and being questioned by attorneys and proving that your story was true and all of that. People would say, I'm so sorry that that happened. But people would not think to say, I'm so sorry your town responded to you that way. I'm so sorry you were judged. And you might find yourself, hopefully not, but if something like this happened in your town, you might find yourself wanting to take like, oh, that's a scary situation and I don't want to be part of that. And I'm telling you, that kid in that situation does feel that. And that, the trauma, it's not secondary trauma, but it's like the trauma that comes from the response to the trauma, in my experience, was stronger than the trauma itself. This is how I've put this together for my own experience with big T's and little T's, right? If I had been nurtured as a kid, if I had been shown where I could be big and loud and bright, and that was acceptable, but it's okay if the adults around me had said, but this is where we do that. We're going to find a channel for you to do that. While you're in school, maybe you do need to be quiet and sit down and listen, but we're going to get you into these areas where you can really shine because you're just exuberant or whatever. Then I feel like I would have felt accepted and I would have felt like I belonged. And when big T's happened to me, I don't think that I would have questioned myself as much. Had people responded well, I don't think that I would have felt like shamed. I wouldn't have felt like it was my fault. Like if I just went away, if I didn't exist anymore, that everybody else's life would have been better. Those are big things to feel. And I think that as adults, as the community, we can be there to make sure that we are not the cause of little T's. So I feel like having that secure, not having those microaggressions kind of on your person from the get-go, or having, like Stable Moments, a mentor that believes in you, shows you you matter, pours into you, allows you to be exactly who you are, and that there's nothing wrong about that, and that we have space for you. I think that when you believe that, or you've at least been shown one example of that, when big T's do happen, you have more resilience to go into those situations and to handle them better and not have them completely devastate you. The little T's, I think, can chip away at you, chip away, chip away, chip away. They can suck the life out of you like leeches. And so then when big T's do happen, I mean, you almost expect them because you don't even feel like you were worth anything anyway. And of course you would be preyed on, or of course this would happen to you because you just don't matter. And then of course you're not going to have a supportive environment or the resources you need to process what happened and to heal from it because you already knew that nobody really cared anyway, right? So that's why I feel like making sure people know that they matter, making sure that we're not causing big T's, but not just big T's, making sure that we're not causing little T's. And we do that by how we respond and support people after and before big T's. And we do that simply by pouring into people, showing up for people, showing them that they matter. And it is like these small things. Small things can have positive and negative effects on the kids that we show up for. A kid that knows that they're annoying and that everybody thinks they're annoying. That isn't helpful. That can be something that hugely affects their self-esteem and who they think they can be in this world. So if you want that kid to just grow up and be powerful and be self-sufficient and do all these things instead of a menace to society, then we need to pour into that kid. And we need to be like, dude, you're awesome. Like, I get it. You're energetic. You're this, you're that. And I'm here for it. And I can handle it. Okay? So in our mentorship program, that's what we do. We allow people to show up exactly as they are. We understand them. We drop any agenda that we have. We accept them. And we just give them space to be. And I think that that is one of the most powerful things that we can do to build resilience against small and big T's. So in my experience, it was the smaller T's, the things that I could not say, this is what happened to me. Because I'll tell you, in my mind, if you said what was traumatic in your life, I would say that people weren't nice. People weren't kind. People didn't have time for me. People did not respond to things that were traumatic to me in a way that made me feel safe or worthy. That is it. The things that you could point to, obviously, in my story and say, that's a big trauma, those are not the things that stuck with me the most. Okay? And the good news about that is you can't do anything about big T's people have suffered. But you can do something to ensure that small T's don't happen, that you are not creating small T's, and you are giving them the space to have the response that people need, the safety of being themselves. Okay? And that's what we do in Stable Moments Mentorship. So I hope that that wasn't like too much of a self-disclosure. I know in the Stable Moments program we talk about, that we usually do not self-disclose unless it is for the betterment of the person that we're working with. And I do self-disclose this very intentionally to try to illustrate that maybe big T and little t can be retired. It's just an experience. People have had an experience. And I think that we want to know the details because we want to make meaning and we want to know why somebody's behavior is the way it is. And we want to know what we can expect. And we also want to make ourselves feel like, oh, okay, that's why they're like that. And that would never happen to me. We try to put things in boxes so that we can make ourselves feel safe. That wouldn't happen to me. Instead, if we can just trust and understand that everybody has an experience. Everybody has endured traumas. They have digested those traumas and processed them differently. There may be people that tell you, no, the big T was the big T. I don't care about the small T's. If this big T didn't happen, I wouldn't have been devastated and had all this negative impact. Okay? The idea is to show up open-minded and understand that there is a story. There's an experience. It has nothing to do with your story or your experience. You're going to be there, hold space for that experience and try to understand it the best you can and acknowledge when you can't understand it. I don't get that. I've never lived through that. That must be so tough. Thank you for sharing. And just understand that it's all an experience. There's good that can come out of trauma. There's bad. Like, we want to go, this is good, this is bad. This shouldn't have happened. It's good that this happened. But not everything's hunky-dory. And we can all say that because of some of our adversities, it made us the person we are today and all of that. So it's not good or bad. It is what it is. It's a spectrum of all of the emotions. And the most important thing is not categorizing people's experiences in big and little and good and bad and hard and easy. It is listening and being there and empathizing. Okay? So, if big T's and little t's help your brain, then that's fine. But I think we're moving away from that, and we are understanding that all it is a human in front of us that we are going to show up for, be kind to, empathize with, and try to understand without, as much as we can, without putting our own lens, our own reactions, our own experiences onto the other person. Me, my experiences, how I experience little t's versus big T's, I will try to always put that aside when I'm hearing somebody else because they had a completely different experience. And it is just as valid as my experience, okay? So that's really it. That's my story on big T's and little t's. I hope it helps you kind of understand that we're just not categorizing. Categorizing is something our brain does, so we're not going to judge ourselves for it, but we're going to try really hard to just hear and experience and respond in a kind and empathetic way. All right, if you want to know more about the Stable Moments mentorship model, go check it out at stablemoments.com. Thank you so much for being a big deal in the life of a child and helping us end the foster care crisis. Until next time.